Welcome everyone to another episode of Gayside Stories, where the gay shit goes, and in my case, it's where the gay shit goes to die. I am your host, Trilificent. Again, thank you for joining me for another week. You guys can listen to this show now on Pippa, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Acast, TuneIn, Castbox, or at GaysideStories.com/shows. I don't know the fate of SoundCloud. We'll just have to see what happens. Remember to use the hashtag GaysidePod when you're live tweeting or posting about the show. I'm doing a gay culture series, so if you're interested in providing your thoughts on what gay culture is and what it means to you, please reach out via Twitter, email, or leave a voicemail. All of that information is in the show notes. Last thing before I introduce my guest, please take a little bit of time to do the audience survey. I know it's kind of long, but it does help me out with a lot of things. They do ask some good questions. Some of them are a little intrusive, so if you want to skip some of them and it lets you, go ahead. But the link to the survey is bit.ly/Gayside Survey. That's bit.ly/Gayside Survey. That link will also be in the show notes, and it's on the website under the extras header. And without further ado, you've heard him clinking in the background. I'm going to let my guest introduce himself.
Sorry about that. Oops. Hi, everybody. My name is Verdell. Happy to be on the show.
I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that you reached out. I'm going to be honest. I was a little taken aback when you showed your interest in being on the show. I don't know why I still am like that, but you were like, hey, I want to be on the show. And then you listed all this stuff, and I was like, wow, he's like really well-rounded, and I am so trash. But sure, come on through.
I mean, you're not trash. Of course not.
Well, I mean, sure. Sure. But again, thank you for being a listener and supporting the show, and now being a guest. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, me too. I think it'll be fun.
All right. So speaking of fun, let's get into the segments. First segment is the School and Life. Quick reminder, this is just something that I like to highlight that helped me and my guest, if they have something, get through the week. And the reason why I do this is because there is so much going on in the world, and there are so many people that are struggling from day to day, myself included. So number one, I like to do it because it helps me remind myself that you have things to look forward to. You have things that are helping you get through the week. It's not just I'm struggling and dragging. Like, you actually are doing things. And the other reason is because I feel like it might be inspirational to someone else. Maybe you hear it and you hear me say, I'm looking forward to hanging out with my friends, and it reminds you, hey, I haven't seen my friends in a long time. I should hang out with my friends, and I'll have something to look forward to too. So that's why I like to do it really quick. So my School in Life for this week is actually show related, and it is looking at the analytics of the show. Now, I'm not really big on looking at the analytics, but because I switched over from SoundCloud to Pippa does a lot better job of showing me the numbers and where people are listening. And so what really got me was they have this map, and it shows where people are listening. So obviously most of the listeners are from the US, but it was pinging listeners from Ghana, from Kenya, the United Kingdom, Australia, France, India, Japan, Antigua and Barbuda, which I was like, what? The Netherlands, Sweden, Canada. So first I want to say thank you to anyone that is in any of these areas and any other area that I didn't mention for listening to the show. And I would challenge you all to be a little bit more interactive and let me know where you're listening from. Tweet me, and hey, we can talk. And I mean, I know I've kind of been on a little bit of a Twitter break except for my scheduled posts, but if you at me and and I see it, I will see it eventually. I will respond or DM me or something like that. So that's my schooling life. It's just when I saw Ghana on the list, I was like, who the hell is listening to this show in Ghana? But hey, you know, to each
You're
their own.
international. You're international. Look at that.
International, baby. So, Verdell, what's your schooling life for this week?
Well, my schooling life is the fact that I only have to work one day next week.
Look.
That is very exciting for me. I realized that I had a bunch of days and that it's going to, I want to use them sooner rather than later. And I was just like, you know what? I just had like this new mindset. I've been, reading a couple of, well, maybe that's part of my schooling life too. I'm reading this really cool book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Okay.
And it basically talks about how to negotiate. And it just was eye-opening just about how to talk to people and how to kind of get what you want out of things. He's like a hostage negotiator for the FBI and talking about how to negotiate with people, and he does consulting with all these other businesses and whatnot. And it's just really, really eye-opening to read it and then to really hear, because like I do comms work and stuff as well. So the things that he's saying I've employed in other places, but it's just like, oh, wow, duh, that makes total sense to talk to people and acknowledging, most of us, even if we like to say that we're rational, we really operate with emotions. And so you have to engage those realities and things like that. And so when reading that, I was like, oh, and I went to, talk to my boss, which, my boss is a pretty cool boss. But I never asked if I could take my days. I just said, okay, so here's what I'm going to take my days. When is the best time for me to take them? And so I was like, okay, because I thought about like, okay, like not the rational part, because oh well, these are mine, they belong to me, I can take whatever I want. But I was like, okay, let's engage the emotion. If I make it feel like it's his decision that I could take the vacation, then I'm more likely to get most about all of what I want. And that's exactly what happened.
Come on, reverse psychology.
Yeah, you make people feel like they're going to make the decision, and then you usually get what you want. And so, I mean, it's not like he probably wouldn't have said no anyway, but I was able to get it on such short notice, and it was even his idea about when to take them. And so it was just confidence for me to do it. And I think just everybody should take more priority and take care of themselves. Like,
absolutely.
These jobs don't really care about us. They just want their stuff done. And I mean, you got to eat, got to pay your bills, you got to do stuff. But I think the biggest lesson that I've been really working on is that you really can't do anything if you're a mess.
And that is the whole truth of the matter.
Like, you can't do anything. You can't budget your money. You can't. I mean, there's so many little things that, like the stuff that we tell people they need to do to get their lives together, you almost can't do it if you yourself are not together. Like, if you're exhausted, if your health is out of whack, if you can't sleep, you can't go to the gym, you can't budget your money, you can't go grocery shopping. It's all those other things that you don't take care of yourself. You can't do it. And so to me, I was like, I want to take my days. And so I took my days, and I'll have to go to work on Monday, but then I want to be back until the following Tuesday.
Yep.
And then, so yeah, take what you need to get what you need for yourself, and don't be afraid to not just ask for it, but negotiate for it.
You know what? That is good advice. I like it. Well, I hope you guys learned something from that, because I know I did. I'm like, let me take some notes, because he's over here preaching a word right here, which apropos. So let's get into the next segment, and that is the Come Quick segment.
I'm gonna come, sir.
Oh yeah! So first up, I came across this article. It says 4 men charged with hate crimes and beating of gay couple. And I chose this particular article because it just goes back to what I've said on a couple of previous episodes, that just because you see gay men on Instagram or on TV or doing things, that doesn't mean that we're safe. Like, it's still dangerous out here for gays. So I'll run down the points of the article. 4 Florida men are now facing felony hate crime charges, and I'm not going to read their names because Footage from April 8th showed couple Renee Charlikara and Dmitry. I'm not sure what his last name is. Good luck. This is not funny though. Being brutally beaten after the Miami Beach Gay Pride Festival. A bystander, Helmut Muller Estrada, attempted to protect the victims and was knocked unconscious and awoke in a pool of his own blood, according to reports. It says the suspects are between the ages of 20 and 21. They turned themselves in the following day after their faces were plastered on the news and social media. So not because they felt guilty for what they had done, but because they knew that the smackdown was going to come after they were all over social media. It says during the assault, the men reportedly called the victims an anti-gay slur in Spanish. And with the new charges, the men each face up to 30 years in prison. And so when I read this article, the first thought that I had was, I wonder if they'll try to enact a quote-unquote gay panic defense. I wonder if they'll say, oh, they were trying to hit on us or something of that nature. Because as I read on a previous episode, a lot of, what do you want to call them? People in these situations where they perpetrate hate against someone, they use that defense to try to lessen the charges, because it's like, oh, I'm sure somebody or probably multiple people on the jury will be able to relate to the thought that gay men throw themselves at people, and I had to protect myself from that. Which is funny, because when it's a woman saying that against a man, it's, oh, what did she do? But anyway, that was my initial thought. And my second thought is, I hope they get convicted and I hope they go to jail for as long as possible, because this is ridiculous in 2018. Like, we can't even go to the spaces that we've created for ourselves and be safe. We can't go to that space and go home. We can't be in love and hold hands with the person, which we know how, the stereotypes and the thoughts about finding love as a gay man. So you have two that have done that. They're holding hands after going to the Pride Festival, and they get beat up. And then someone else tries to step in like, hey, don't do that. And you knock him unconscious. It's crazy. It's just crazy. Like, there's just no regard for life. I don't get that. I don't get how people how they can grow up and navigate the world with no regard to human life.
I mean, I kind of can. I don't know what that says about me or my experiences at that, but I think that, plenty of us are taught, like, it's never directly said, but we're often taught that some people are a little less human than us, which means they kind of deserve what they get. It's never said blatantly, but in how some people are allowed to be treated over others, it's clear. And I think, at least the thing that popped up in my mind when you're talking about the story, is how a lot of gay people in urban areas often forget that the way it is in, like, an ATL or a DC or whatever, that's not normal. Like in DC, I can know where I can go. I have these normal little spots, and like you said, those spots aren't safe either. Just to be frank, but every place isn't this super gay friendly place. Actually, most places still aren't, and even the gay friendly places really aren't. Like, I can remember even in DC, coming somewhere with my boyfriend at one point, and being on the escalator. Like, we weren't even holding hands, but we were, the way we were talking in position, it was odd. How you could look at people, you could tell, like, okay, they were on a date or something.
Yeah.
It's something like that. And you could just, I got a couple of looks, or, in Chinatown every spring, like clockwork, the Hebrew Israelites are out there, looking like, they're having a probate or something, and they're yelling all the scriptures, and the gays and the fags are going to hell or whatever. And so just this idea that, because we have a couple of characters on TV and there's some prominent ones. And so, yes, there are ways that things have progressed. However, in everyday actual life, it's still treacherous for a lot of people.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that, even in the midst of of the, and I don't want to be dismissive of advances, but a lot of the representative victories that we might have had, they're great. They're awesome. The fact that now, a gay kid, a trans kid can see perhaps something on TV that reminds them of themselves. That's really great. But there's so many people who don't get that, who for every good thing they see on TV or hear on the radio, they get 1,000 other things that bring their life, almost to an end. And I think that just, hopefully people will start paying more attention to those things.
Yep. So, as I said before, it's part of the reason why I highlight stories like this. And I agree with everything that you said. So, the next article says, Vermont lawmakers pass gender-neutral bathroom bill to send, quote-unquote, powerful message. So, we'll balance the not-so-great story with something a little bit better. So, Vermont Republican Governor Phil Scott signed H.333 after it was passed unanimously by the state Senate, which, oh, wow, that's surprising.
That's amazing.
Right, by an overwhelming majority in the House. The measure will take effect on July 1st. The law mandates that all single-user bathrooms in public buildings and places of public accommodation, such as schools, restaurants, and workplaces, be identified as gender-free. The law does not apply to bathrooms with more than one toilet, which, obviously. Supporters suggested the law sends a pointed message, given the Trump administration's rescinding last year of protections for transgender students to use bathrooms that correspond with their gender identity. House Speaker Mitzi Johnson, Democrat, said in a statement, quote, "Too many states are passing bathroom bills that move in the wrong direction, discriminating against LGBTQIA individuals, and forcing school children to use the bathroom that corresponds with their gender at birth, not their chosen gender identity. In a time where LGBTQIA rights are being rolled back on the federal level, when the Trump administration isn't protecting children, it is our duty to step in." And I really liked that quote by that House Speaker, because it's just something that has been on my mind a lot. And a lot of the policies that have been coming out of this administration are not even really policies. It's just a lot of rollbacks. I'm like, what is this, Walmart? Like, y'all rolling back everything. Like, why do you arbitrarily need to roll back protection for transgender people? The little protection that they have. So I thought that this was something very good to highlight. Shout out to Vermont and the lawmakers. Again, it was very surprising that the entire Senate and probably most of the House all were on board with this bill.
Yeah, that's really good. I think, well, one, this is a great thing. It's really, really good. It's interesting how when you bring this topic up, and some of the things I've done in the past, it's just interesting when you talk about bathrooms. It's something that people take for granted, particularly that if it's no issue for them, and to talk about how, and to demonstrate for people how that's such a, like, you need a bathroom. Like, yeah, it's something that you can't,
it's necessary.
And how many, like, when I taught in my communications classes and we would have a communication and gender piece, I would always bring this up. And at this particular time, the bathroom bill, I think it was in North Carolina, was all in the news. And so we talked about it. And so to my students, even though like it wasn't specifically like a gender or whatever class, I brought that stuff in to expose them to it. And so when we talked about it, and some of my students kind of were like, well, I don't really know about this. So I said, well, think about it. The bathroom in your house, is it gender neutral? And they said, no. I said, yes, it is. and then they would be like, well, what do you mean? I said, do you have a bathroom for men and women separately? And, and they're like, if you have only one bathroom in your house, everybody uses it, right? And they said, well, yeah. And I said, okay. And if you have more than one, are they labeled? Do only the men use the one and the women use the other? No. Okay. Think about when you're at family reunion, all those people who you really don't know, you all use the similar bathrooms, don't you? Yeah. Well, then why?
Yeah.
Like just to make them think about why they have an aversion to something and say, okay, you have an aversion, but it's not why you think it is. Let's talk about what it actually is. And so to get people to see differently, and I hope, and actually, and in my experience, honestly, too, a lot of gay men really need
Oh
some help with
yes.
understanding gender.
Oh
And
yes.
so they, like, a lot of us don't, well, many of us don't quite get it either, and we kind of fit into very, very, I mean, I get it. It's all that we know. And so, okay, so you come to terms with the fact that, okay, you like men. Okay, fine. Or you like the same gender. Okay, fine. But you don't really deal with the other stuff, the other insinuations you have about men and how men should be and how you are compared to that. And so I just would hope that situations like this would help everybody, including more gay men, to really think about gender, how they may think of it in a way that's harmful to even to themselves and to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Try to make stuff a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree. And shout out to you for educating the masses, or at least a small sliver of them, because
Just a few.
it just, people don't a lot of people, I would say, they don't take the time to educate themselves on things. And it goes back to something that I said on a previous episode about having opinions and not having any factual basis. And this is one of those things where it's like, you need to know what it is that you are talking about and having an opinion on before you start blurting out what your opinion is. Or just, even if you're not blurting it out, like, at least know the facts when you make that opinion. Because if you know them, especially in this instance and the way that you presented it, it's pretty easy to be like, okay, I get it. It's not really a big deal. And again, it's the bathroom. It is the bathroom. We all have to go. It doesn't matter what your gender or what your sexuality or whatever else you have going on, your race. Mother Nature does not play with anybody. When she calls, you answer. It doesn't matter what you have going on. She don't do call waiting.
Well, I think it goes back to what we were just talking about before about, yeah, it's logic and being rational, but it's also emotion. And
Yeah.
so a lot of things about gender we hold to because it's how we view ourselves in the world to be. And so if you view yourself, let's say if you're a gay dude and you think that the fact that you're masked and you wear your Jordans and your fitted cap and you go to the gym, whatever, and so that makes you better than the other gays, right? Because you're not like those other folks over there, then it doesn't matter how many facts I present to you, your sense of self is wrapped up in that. And so I can show you a flow chart from here to the end of the United States. If who you feel yourself to be, your sense of self is wrapped up in this idea of what a man should be, until you deal with those emotions and those feelings, it's not going to matter. And I think that's what I've realized, that you can attach it to, okay, you can't just drop facts in people's laps, because facts in and of themselves, I mean, and studies have shown that, like, facts don't change people's minds. You have to deal with the emotions. That's why it's not common if you see like some type of conservative person or whatever, when they change their mind, it's because someone close to them is in a certain experience or has a certain situation. Because now it's emotions involved. It's not sheer raw facts. It's like, oh, well, wait a minute. I was against the trans bill, but now that, this person that I love dearly is trans, now, wait a minute. I got to think about this differently, because now they're hitting their emotions and their feelings.
Yeah. You know what? That's a good point, and I would agree, but I'm going to also highlight that it is sad that there are so many people that can't see the humanity in others unless it's somebody close to them. And I think we'll just leave it at that, because we can get into a whole different topic just on this. But shout out to Vermont.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
shout out to them. Everybody copy off of them.
yes,
Do
please.
that.
Yes, I mean, I know it's wishful thinking in this raggedy state, but maybe one day in my lifetime, Texas will get her act together. Maybe. So, with that, we're going to transition over to the main topic. So I'm really excited about this because I've had this in my notes for a while. And so when you approached me and you had these like credentials, I was like, oh my, okay. But I was excited because, like I said, I've been wanting to talk about this. So we're going to talk about religion and how it relates to sexuality and whatnot. So a part of this is going to be a little bit of a different conversation. It's going to be more of an interview because there are specific things and experiences that you have that I want you to talk about or that you want to talk about. So let's do that. So let's start with religion. Why don't you talk about your theological education and research?
Okay, sure. So my undergrad, I went to Rutgers University in New Jersey. I'm from New Jersey, by the way, the Jersey Shore.
Okay.
And so I went to Rutgers University. My minor was in religion. And at the time, I was really heavily involved in like on-campus Christian ministry. I joined a Christian fraternity, dotted all the Christian I's and dotted all the Christian T's. But oddly enough, I did a minor in religion. And in that minor, this is the part that I think a lot of people sometimes get confused, that when you study religion in an academic situation, it's really not like going to church and having Bible study. You're going and you're learning, you're treating what you're learning about, whatever religion you're learning about, as like you were learning architecture or English or math, right? And so you might talk about the implications of faith, but they're not assuming, like, it's not like Bible study at church where you're learning a lesson to to go pray about it and impact your life in a positive way. It's about talking about what we know about the text, what we know about the people who wrote it, what we know about the time, things that you would do in any other situation.
Right.
And so I was taking classes I took a class that was literally just called Jesus. And on the one hand, that might make somebody really excited, but what we really did was talk about just things about, like, what do we actually know about Jesus, right? The person. And the reality is we know very little. Very little. In fact, I mean, it would be a toss-up if he actually existed, if it weren't for like a couple of little throwaway lines and some historical documents that kind of point to the fact that they could mention Jesus, they were talking about his brother, James. And the fact that they could talk about James, the brother of Jesus, so easily, the fact that everybody knew who that was, meant that, okay, this person more than likely really did exist. But Jesus, contrary to how we think, really wasn't that important when he was alive. And so he was just a nobody. And so it's like people who are nobodies, when you don't have any type of way to record things, they don't get remembered unless somebody, they do something extraordinary. So I took that after graduating, wanted to go more into ministry, and I eventually ended up at Howard University School of Divinity. Did not know what I was getting myself into, but I loved it.
Okay.
But I did not realize, because I did not grow up in church, that what I was learning in divinity school really wasn't what they were doing in church. And so I would try to bring what I was learning in school when I would go to church, and I'd be wondering, well, is everybody looking at me so weird, looking at me so funny? Or we'll be in like small group talking about, I don't know, the Exodus story, and I'll just be like, oh, well, there's several theories on how the Israelites really emerged, and they're all like, what? Like, what do you mean? And I didn't understand that the difference between what happens in church and then what happens in like a divinity school.
Right.
Because to me, they were like, it was cool to me. And then just going through all of that, going through churches and whatever, eventually I wanted to do more academic work because I saw myself, getting toward a PhD. And it was a time period when everybody was trying to get a PhD. So people were like being told no. But a lot of my professors were like, oh, no, you actually can write well and do well, so you should try. And so I actually, for some reason, went and got another master's in theological study. And so I did a lot of research on what they'd call prophetic preaching. And I don't mean like prophetic like Miss Cleo, TBN, you're going to get a car tomorrow type prophetic. I mean like Martin Luther King, James Cone, Howard Thurman type of prophetic preaching, speaking to powerful people about justice or whatever, and a lot of white Christian culture. A lot of what we're talking about, like with Donald Trump and Christians today, is stuff that I studied years ago and actually predicted.
No.
But everybody thought I was a little bit too much. I think I would say about just like, no, they don't really care about life. They don't really care about people. They just want to win.
Yeah.
And they don't really care about you. I use, I don't know if you heard of this, but it's a charity called World Vision. And when they sponsor children in Africa and all that other stuff, which is already to me a problem, but that's another conversation. But
yeah,
they were changing their policies to have workers in same-sex relationships to honor, their spouses with, like if you're married and you have insurance, they have insurance, just doing that basic thing. And so people began to withdraw their donations in droves.
Oh my.
And so I said, yeah, you all, and even today I say, it's like, I don't like to be one of those people who are like, oh, well, why are you mad? You shouldn't be mad. Why are you mad about? I don't like to be one of those people. I do think, though, at some point, it's like they were willing to let children starve because Susan and Mandy wanted to get married. They were willing to let children starve.
Yeah.
So why do you think that anything is beneath these people? They've already showed you countless times, you know what I mean, who they are.
They've shown exactly who they are.
Yeah. But throughout my time in grad school, all that I studied, like some of my favorite things to study were like Jesus in the Temple, white Christian culture. Now, I can never say this word straight. I think I have a speech impediment. Evangelical culture. I was studying that really heavily, and you've heard that word in the news all the time.
Yeah.
I can never say it without like pausing because it's just, I don't know, for whatever reason. I have to like pause and breathe and say it.
It's
but
fine.
That's
how I am with names that I'm not familiar with, like I did earlier. So it's fine. It's fine.
Just so funny. It's like it's on my resume and I studied this and I can't say it, but it's so funny. But yeah, that I studied that. A lot of progressive theology that I've studied and been involved in. Also, a lot of religious organizing and advocacy work. I was involved. You can probably search some of this stuff. Like I was involved to help create, some advocacy initiatives around Black Christians and sexuality and purity culture, things like that.
Okay. So, talk a little bit about your experience as a minister.
Ooh, okay. I have to preface it by saying this. I think it's also a unique experience being an out, for the time I was a minister, being an out openly gay minister, because I think there's a unique complexity there that I think gets lost.
Oh, yes, I agree.
I think, one, I will say that I have met some wonderful people who really do take their title as minister, as clergy, very seriously. I know a lot of them, and they really are trying to do their best. And a good amount of people actually are trying to do their best with what they know. And so the idea about, like, I usually get annoyed when people have the idea of every preacher as this money grubbing prosperity preacher, because most preachers aren't like that. The average pastor probably doesn't make more than $30,000 a year. And so the idea that, it's a preacher, they're automatically whatever. While I could understand people having their reservations about preachers, certainly, absolutely, the idea that everybody's trying to get a buck, most of them are broke. They just look expensive.
Yeah.
Just to be honest. But with that said, it could be a very thankless job and a very difficult job. I think particularly, again, like I said, being an out gay minister, I had to do a lot more to prove myself than people who were either closeted or presumed straight. That could get away with doing and being almost anything, and I had to dot all of my I's and cross all of my T's as well as somebody else's.
Yeah.
Just to get a look. And I think that's the truth for a good number of of queer clergy, and I use that just as a overall, like most of the trans and gay and bi clergy that are out that I know, we're overworked, underpaid. We have to do a whole lot more, and usually we're better preachers. Just to be totally honest,
Come on and talk your ish.
I'm just being real. Like most of, it's difficult because you have to do so much more, and then particularly if you're in certain spaces, you can get paraded as, oh, well, you're the token. And everyone is like, oh, well, yeah, we have to be better to our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. But then when the Men's Day comes up, you don't get invited. When the job opportunity comes up, your name isn't floated across. They'll like your picture when it's Pride weekend, but when it's really time to stand up, no one really does. And so it could be a very thankless, very lonely job. I think for me, like every time someone talks about wanting to get involved in the ministry, whereas I ask them what they mean by that. And if you just mean general service to people to make them better, you can do that anywhere. You can be that anywhere. But if you want to be a preacher, what do you plan on doing to make sure that you eat?
Wow.
So just to be honest about it, how are you going to make sure that you eat? Seminary is, at this point, I mean, as much as I love my theological education, I mean, it's almost criminal how expensive it is. And you have to get into all this, spend all this money, get into all this debt to hopefully get a job that will barely pay you $50,000 with a couple of benefits. Like, it's just not a sweet deal. Like, it's borderline criminal in my opinion, but just, because when people believe that they're called by God, you can get them to do almost anything. And so if you're coming to say, oh, I feel like I'm called by God, you're going to be willing to take on debt. You're going to be willing to go without health insurance because you think that God has called you and that God's going to protect you. And, well, that doesn't really happen too often. Just talking about just the reality. It's, I think also to be fair, because of my position to the faith and the profession at this point, that's where some of my feelings come from. And so I try to be honest about it, but I think being fair, but then being honest about what I've experienced. And it's just, I miss the preaching. I miss that. I miss interacting with people on the everyday points of their life, those things that I miss. But I don't miss having to always defend myself or to be critiqued harshly because I won't let anyone run over me, because I'm out and because I'm preaching. I'm tired of having to defend my credentials, which usually I have more than the people who are coming at me. Mm-hmm. It just, at some point, but I wasn't getting a benefit to my life. The output that I was putting toward it wasn't equaling what I was getting out of it.
That's very honest and very real, and I'm glad that you said that. So let's switch gears a little bit. And you mentioned outreach, and you mentioned just now about if you just want to be of service to people, that you can do it at almost anywhere. So talk a little bit about your advocacy work.
Well, I kind of stumbled onto it by accident. Right. It just happened. It was because I guess I saw many things in life happen when it seamless that way. I started when I started being more, getting involved in more progressive religious work toward, I would say, the tail end of my time at Wesley. And I would get involved with an organization called Many Voices. It's an organization that works on producing resources and materials to advance inclusion in the Black church. So it's a good place to check out, Many Voices, if you're interested in that. But I started doing some stuff with them, and because I my writing and communications background, got involved in doing some advocacy work. Because of also my preaching background, started getting invited to things like panels and such. And then eventually I started doing some work with some justice organizations, and there are a number of justice organizations that are attempting to work with religious folks to curtail some of the really bad religion that we have going on in the United States today. And so working with them, working on issues, everything from immigration rights to economic issues, anti-racism, of course, LGBTQ inclusion. The cool part is just to really be able to see how religion really touches all of these areas. Mm-hmm. Like if you're an atheist who wants an abortion in a state where you can't because the religious right and everybody else got all the clinics shut down, you're impacted by faith even though you don't believe. And so I think it's something that's really, really important for people to understand, like religion, not just as something that, oh, those folk do over there, but religion is such a uniquely human thing that you really can't avoid it.
At all.
Right? Like you can't avoid it. Like you don't have to personally believe it. Like it's not just something that you believe or don't believe. It's something that humans do. Even like people at, remember the Michael Jackson concerts, people falling out? That's religion. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
a religious. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that there's not a scientific way to explain that. So I'm not saying like he has like a supernatural power, but that experience, or being at a baseball game, or if somebody hits that right high note, and and you feel a way about it, those are things that people interpret religiously. And so even if you yourself aren't religious, like, oh, I don't go to church, I don't pray, being religious in some way is like a human quirk. Nobody else does this but us, and different species of humans too do it. Have done it, but it's something that humans do, so you can't really get away from it. So that's what my advocacy experience really helped me to see, how you can organize and gather religious people together to undo some of the harm that's been done.
Okay. I like that. So let's switch a little bit and we'll dive a little bit more into, I guess, specific religious things. Let's talk a little bit about the Bible. So what are your favorite stories from the Bible?
Okay. Well, I think my all-time favorite story from the Bible is when Jesus goes into the temple with a whip and flips over the tables and chases everybody out. Okay. That's my favorite story.
All right.
And why it's and I actually did research on this at Howard. The reason why is because I think we always skip over it. Like we know it's there, but we don't talk about it because Jesus is supposed to be this really nice, non-violent guy, right?
Right.
And so the way it's set up, like when you research what the temple actually served, it was basically like a public square, a church, a bank, and a city hall all in one, right? So that's really what the temple was. And people from Jesus' part of the neck of the woods, they were angry at the folks in the temple anyway. And so they were like soldiers all around. And so imagine, like, let's say this big old church / city hall / bank in the center hall with police all around. And here comes this dude off the street who looks like he slept on the street, and his merry band of poor people with this whip staging a protest to the point where people are running and fleeing. And this is like a busy place during the busiest time of the year. So imagine like Saturday afternoon at the mall during Christmas. And that's how this place was, kind of, right? And so this man comes in and his band of people who so vigorously protest in the temple by throwing over tables and stuff that they have to flee and hide. Right? And so this could not just be some little very kind, pleasant protest. Oh no, stop doing what you're doing. Oh, please stop. This is wrong. There had to be some serious shit going on here, just to be honest. And that's what ultimately gets Jesus arrested and killed. Like nobody cared about Jesus until he did this. And I think that's the thing for me that makes Jesus interesting.
Right. That memorable act that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, because he wasn't, and it's something that, again, it's not really, no one really talks about this outside of academic circles, which is really bad in my opinion. But Jesus was one of many, many people who were considered a Messiah. And actually, there are people who did a way better job than he did when he was alive, who were much better, much more well-known, much more popular, than Jesus when he was alive. And by all accounts, he failed. The Messiah was not supposed to be arrested and killed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But this is the event that no one really cared about a Jewish guy talking to poor people. It was this event staging a coup, almost, if you will, on the epicenter of the society that got him on Rome's radar, to the point where they wanted to find him and kill him. And so you just can't be this little nice, meek, mild little person if you and your crew are ballsy enough to disrupt a place like that to the point when they come find you, you pretty bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Somehow, some way. And to me, and I think the other point about that story for me is that Jesus cared about people's money. And I think that's why it's important to me, because of how they were swindling people for their money.
Right.
And so that's why, and I think another thing that we overlook too, is the fact that Jesus cared about people having resources that they deserve, that they needed, and how all that kind of ties into that one story. So that's one. My other story is that I think I would say is my favorite is, I would say, the flood.
Okay.
Because I think it's a great example of myth.
Uh-huh.
And because there are numerous cultures in the ancient Near East that have similar stories, almost to the letter. And there were two big rivers that ran through this area. I forgot their names. I don't want to misquote them, so I won't even try to remember them. But they seasonally overflowed. One you could predict when it was going to overflow, so that people could do whatever they needed to do. But the other one they couldn't predict, and they wrote about it and how people drowned, people lost property, and to them this was the end of the world. And so, telling a myth about a flood and God wiping everything away, it makes sense when you have a people who don't understand how weather works.
Yes.
They don't know how rivers work like that, And so what they do is they make up a story to explain. Well, because think about it, even floods today, if you have a house and it's flooded, everything is gone, you have to start from scratch. It's like your world is starting over from scratch, right?
Right.
And so that's how they dealt with it. They wrote a story about how, the world ends and maybe God is mad at us because God is drowning us and we have to start over again if we don't know because of these waters. And to me, it just shows how a very human way of dealing with things that we don't know but have to live with. So to me, yeah, those would be my two stories.
Okay. I admittedly have never read through the Bible in its entirety, so I don't have a favorite story. So we're gonna just mosey on to the next.
Most people haven't.
We'll get to that. We'll get there. So let's talk about favorite Bible quotes, because I do have a couple of those.
Oh, I would say one of my favorites is. I'm paraphrasing, but it's in Philippians, and Paul writes, I know how to do with a little, I know how to do with a lot, but in all things, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Yes, that's one of mine. But I have a different reason, because obviously, like I said, I didn't read the whole Bible. But when I was trying to do religion, I used to go to a church here in Houston, and that quote would be how they ended every service. And it was, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And now that I think about it, kind of gives me like Planeteer vibes. But anyway.
Yeah, I was thinking, wait, is that is that like a sporting event type of?
Yeah, yeah. At the time, I was like, okay, this gets the people hype. It gets the people going. But looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, it was a little bit cheerleaderish. So do you have another?
Well, the ones I usually like, and I like them because people usually use them wrong, and so I end up liking the actual meaning. And it's just like that one. I think most people take that verse to mean you can do anything, but if you read the verse in context, like Paul has a very specific thing that he's talking about.
Uh-huh.
And he's like, he's basically saying, I know how to endure through what life brings my way. Not that he beats everything, but, he's shipwrecked, he's abandoned, he's alone, he's hungry, he's sick. And I get through it, I endure it. Not that he's victorious in it all, per se, but it's like, how do I get through? Because of Christ, something on the inside that he has that gets him through that thing. Not that it's not I can do anything because I prayed today, which is what most people use it as. That's not even what he meant. But I think the other one that, what else? I think my other favorite one is, I believe it's in Amos. I think it's Amos, but basically God is talking in Amos, and he's basically saying how he doesn't like church. Like you say, basically he hates their festivals, he hates their gatherings, he hates their songs, all of it, he hates it, but rather he wants justice like a rolling stream. It's something that Martin Luther King quoted.
Oh.
And I like that because God is basically saying, I hate church. You all get together and you sing and you give me offerings and whatever. I hate it all. What I really want is for you to treat people right. That's what I want. And to me, I mean, again, it's right in there.
Yeah,
but
it's in the text. It's in the text.
You hear the end part, but you never hear the part going before it because, I mean, what fun is that, saying that God hates church, right? Right. But yeah, I mean, I like that a lot because it just, when I read it, it was like, oh, wow. God is saying, and this is stuff that God had said, have this festival, have this feast, sing these songs, do these dances or whatever for me. And the very thing that God told them to do, God is like, oh, I hate it. I hate it all. This is all whatever. It's not what I really want.
Yeah. Whew, okay. My other favorite Bible quote is a passage from Isaiah. Isaiah 40 verses 28 to 31. And that's the passage a lot of people may recognize that ends where it's like, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength and mount up with wings as eagles.
Mm-hmm. I know that one very well.
Etc. Etc. So I don't have a personal connection to this Bible quote. The reason why I love it is because my grandmother loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother passed at a very early age. I want to say she was like in her mid-50s when I was in high school. And I'll never forget, I didn't realize that it had been imprinted upon me until after she passed. And my mom and my aunts and everyone was really stressed. They were trying to plan the funeral, and they wanted to put the quote in, what do you call it? In the little booklet. I can't remember what it's called. But they couldn't remember the quote. And so my mom, I mean, she was just going, practically pulling her hair out. And I'm like, what is the issue? And she's like, I want to put this quote in there, but I cannot remember the verse. And I was like, oh, it's just Isaiah, blah, 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 blah. She looked at me like, the hell? And I was like, I mean, I be paying attention sometimes, like, dang. So that set of verses is probably my favorite just because it reminds me of my grandmother that, I feel like I lost way too soon.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of reading the Bible, you posed this, and so I want you to go into a little bit of detail, not too much, because I feel like you're already shaking the table, but people are just gonna have to deal with it.
Really?
Well, because I know enough religious people that they don't allow a lot of room for some of the things that you've been saying. It's kind of like, it is what it is. Like, I believe, and there's no space for an academic view. Mm-hmm. So I could see people kind of being flustered by some of the things that you were saying. So what's something that most people who read the Bible don't realize?
Oh, and you're right about that, by the way. Sometimes because it's such a part of what I do, it's like, I forgot.
Yeah, that's why I said that, because I was like, I could tell by the way it was just flowing from you so naturally. I'm like, it's second nature for you, but a lot of people probably listen to that like, I know he didn't just say Jesus was a nobody. So,
what the funny thing is, though, like, the Bible says Jesus was a nobody too.
Well, but again, so that's why we have this question. So that's one thing that people don't realize who read the Bible. We'll put that in there.
Well, I think a couple things. One, just that people actually don't really read. We're kind of told what's in there, and it's like, it's never like you read it and then you say, oh, that's what's here. We're told what it says and then showed one line. And then we said, hey, this is what it says. See here, right here. Here's what it says right here. So it's like we read with an idea of what it already says before we open the book anyway.
Right.
But I think the one thing that people really don't realize is that this book was not written by people who think like us.
Woo.
And so because of that, it is very difficult to take what they say and apply it to today. Now, of course, there's some things that are like evergreen, like, be nice to
Be
people.
nice, which,
You know,
funnily enough, is the part that people don't take to heart.
you
They'll
know,
take
like,
a lot of the stuff from the Bible literally, but the parts where it's like, just be nice and charitable. People are like, nope, nope.
yeah, yeah, it's like give like the things that if you read honestly, like one of the like being good to like, and it's very specific, like being good to poor people, like choosing to be poor with poor people, being on the side of poor people and advocating for them, is one of the things that goes all the way through the text from the beginning to the end. But that's something that's debatable, which is hilarious to me, but and sad. But it's just the idea that it's a truly a lack of understanding of how these people thought, like the way that we use their writings. If they could come to today, they would be totally confused. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like the fact that we think that Genesis is a scientific account of how the world was made. People didn't like, even our idea of science didn't exist until about 250, 300 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so if you read, I mean, this is also the problem of when you translate something, right?
Yeah.
Genesis was written in Hebrew, and if you read it in Hebrew, it's obvious that this is a poem, and the numbers are supposed to correspond. Like it's Hebrew poetry. It's not obvious in English because English kind of takes all that fun stuff out when you translate it. But they weren't trying to make a scientific proof about how the world came to be. They were just using poetry and imagery that everybody during the time and in that part of the world would use to describe how the world came to be. It wasn't meant to be some scientific exercise. They weren't thinking that way. And so when we use it for that, it's like, oh, that's not really what they meant, so you missed the point. If your point is that, oh, look at what God can do in a week, you're missing the point of what they actually were trying to communicate.
Right.
But it's hard to know that because, again, this is the part where it's about being fair. It's like, you don't hear this stuff in church. I wouldn't have heard most of this if I didn't, go to school like I did. I think people should be more honest about that stuff, because it's not like people say that people wouldn't understand it. It's like, no, they would get it. They just would learn to think for themselves and they wouldn't need you anymore. That's really the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like the idea that it's either just that people either think that either it's all true or it's all a lie. And neither one of those categories really works well for the Bible, because neither one of those things is what they were trying to achieve. It's like reading somebody else's mail, but you only get one piece. And it's from 1920 or something to that extent. It's like they weren't talking to you. They weren't talking about you. And so it's going to come a point where much of what they're saying really doesn't have anything to do with you. And so that's when you begin to make the text mean things that it doesn't really mean,
Right.
which sometimes can be harmless, right?
Yeah, but
Other
sometimes it can be damaging, because I think a lot of people use the text as a weapon. And that's where I think it kind of gets, what's the word, funny, because I can imagine the people who wrote it looking at modern days like, I didn't write this so that you could beat somebody over the head with it.
Well, see, that's the thing. This is just from my perspective. It's like the Bible is really a collection of documents. Like, it's not like a novel that you read from beginning to end. Like the 66, at least in the Protestant Bible, the 66 books that are in there were written by all types of people, ranging across thousands of years. Hundreds of they didn't all get into a room and say, oh, what are you going to write? Oh, what am I going to write? Oh, you write this, I'll write that.
Uh-huh.
And so there are things in there that are wildly contradictory. And so the same guy,
listen.
And that's the thing. It's like, you have to understand who the people were, when they were writing, what they were writing for. It doesn't mean it's totally useless. It's just that the reason why most of us will use it is like, that's not really going to get the most out of it, if you're going to use it at all.
Right.
It's not how you get the most out of it, because, let's say a perfect example, Isaiah talking about, by his stripes we are healed. and we just assume that that's talking about Jesus. But no, they weren't thinking about Jesus. They were thinking about something totally different in the life and history of Israel, right? But because of what we already know and think about Jesus, then, oh yeah, it must be about Jesus, stuff like that. And so just the fact that these people had their own motivations, their own way of seeing the world, their own way, their own goals, and that you, like you said, once in a while, sometimes it doesn't matter. And I see plenty of things where it's like, okay, yeah, that's nice, but that doesn't really mean anything. But if that makes you get up in the morning, fine, whatever. But there are plenty of other things where it's like, no, you're really thinking something really crappy because of what you're reading in this text, and you don't even know why it's there. And that's the scary part.
Indeed. So let's switch gears again, and we'll talk a little bit more about your personal journey rather than the actual religious aspect. So you've mentioned multiple times that you were an out and proud minister. What was that journey like, reconciling your sexuality with your faith, if you had one?
It was definitely a journey. I felt kind of dragged along that journey more so than anything. I remember at Howard having a class with a very, very, and I went to Howard around the time in D.C. where same-sex marriage was being contested in D.C. and in Maryland. And so this was a rocky time. We had protesters in front of the school, and the students would be arguing every other day, and professors took their own sides. It was quite something, to say the least. But in this class, we had a professor that really challenged us on our views, and at the time it felt very uncomfortable because I was uncomfortable with myself. But looking back, I'm happy that she did it, because she made a lot of people who were either against, who were either very homophobic or on the fence. She really put it in a way that made us look at the human damage, that you couldn't escape it. And I really appreciated that, because usually, at least up until that point in my experience, it was always discussed about how basically you're mean, be nice. But the way she presented was like, no, people are being hurt, people are dying because of these ideas. And that was really helpful for me. As I moved along, I didn't really have much help. I kind of went this really rigorous, self-experimental route where I just stayed to myself. I didn't really talk much about my struggles, quote unquote, and what was going on with me, because I wanted it to fully be my decision, right? I wanted it to be something because I understood that if it was something about me that was true, what the implications would have been. And I wanted to be able to own them and not say that I was influenced by this dude I was dating or this job opportunity. I didn't want any of that. I wanted to be because I realized it for myself. And at that time, at one point I started going to this prominent AME church here in the area. Loved it, but I remember one of the pastors making this homophobic joke, and not like some really blatant gross one, but he was talking about how he's on the basketball court or whatever, and some dude came with the whisper in his ear, and how he wasn't with any of that funny stuff, and everybody laughed. Everybody in the congregation was laughing. People on the pulpit were laughing. And I was sitting there with the stuck face, right? And so I'm just like, oh. And I didn't have the machinery to talk about it then, but within 3 months I was gone, from there. Yeah. Eventually, as I grew and wrestled more and more of being, I was okay with who I was, but then when I eventually left United Methodist Church, thinking that might be a better place and that maybe they'd be close to inclusion, maybe, I realized that I didn't want to, I just did an audit. And I said, one, a lot of what I perceived my ministry to be was based on honesty and truth. And I'd be lying to these people.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people told me that I was being overdramatic about it. But I say, okay, what if I went on a date and the right person saw me? Could I lose my job? They were like, oh, well, yeah. I said, well, then how am I being overdramatic if that's the case? And I just had a certain idea what I wanted from my life. I wanted the chance to maybe, I wanted to meet somebody, maybe be in a relationship, maybe get married, maybe live together, maybe have a kid, a dog. And I thought it was unfair that I had to put all that on hold just because somebody else didn't figure out that I was qualified. I just didn't think that was fair.
Right.
I also didn't want to be someone's friend because I was dating somebody in the church at the time. And we actually ended up ending that because he really wanted to rise to ministry ranks. And I was just like, I don't want to be your good friend on the pew for like 5-7 years. I just don't want to be.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. And that's no shade toward him at all. It's just that I just don't want that. I don't want to be your buddy for however long. You know, my uncle and them lived through that. I don't want to live through that. And so I left there, and then I went to the United Church of Christ, and which is a more progressive denomination, all of that. But that's when the institutional junk and the other stuff of ministry snagged me up a bit. Just so many other issues that happen, unless it's particularly any one person's fault, just, falling through initiative cracks and things like that. And so my progress stalled, and just nothing was happening. I was trying to do what I needed to do. And that's a whole other separate conversation, how ordination is becoming a big issue for a lot of churches, because where do you put them? Churches are closing left and right. Being clergy isn't paying anything. You have the issue, you have too many clergy or not enough. And so what do you do? So I eventually, on a professional level, I decided, and I guess we'll come to this later on, when I left and when I stopped being a practicing Christian, part of it was just in terms of professionally, I was like, I'm a reasonably intelligent man. I'm still reasonably young. I put forth a lot of effort into progressing in something, and I looked back over 10 years of work, and I don't have anything. I need to do something else.
Yeah, that's quite the awakening. Wow. So I don't have a long, nice story. Like, I never really got to the point of trying, because when I really tried to get into religion, like when I wasn't being forced to go to church, I was going to church on my own. I went to a place, the same church that I talked about earlier, and it was very inclusive, at least on the surface. I hope that below that it wasn't a bad place, but there were a lot of LGBT people that were involved in that church, and not just as volunteers and things of that nature. So I was like, okay, this may be a good place for me to try to figure it out. But I just have so many personal issues with reconciling life in general with religion that I never really got to the sexuality part, because it was just, I don't want to get into all of that, but I just had questions that I could not wrap my head around what the answers were or what they could be. And so I just kind of like, well, I learned at a very early age, well, not very, but I learned early enough in life. I was like, everything is not for everybody. And I just kind of left it at that. So I don't think we need to spend too much time on actual acceptance, because it sounds like you had no problem collecting your billfold and moving on when things were not what you wanted them to be. So let's talk about progression. And I think you touched on it a little bit, but I want you just to expand a little bit more how your faith or how your beliefs have progressed throughout your life, really, and where you are now.
Well, I think while it took a lot of work to get to my understanding that I have now, I think I had some other things in my favor that had nothing to do with me.
Okay.
And so I think it's important to highlight those. One, like I said, I did not grow up in church. And so there was a lot of things that people are indoctrinated with, that they're attached to,
yes, go.
that I was not. And so I was totally fine with that. And also, I had parents who, I don't really know how well they meant this, but they were okay with me asking questions for the most part. Like, I was told basically that you can ask questions, you just can't be disrespectful. The problem is that usually people find children, particularly black children, and unfortunately even in our own community, when children ask questions, they're viewed as being uppity or disrespectful.
Yeah.
When honestly, anyone who has common sense, who's observing honestly with no pretense, would have this question. Um, and so I had that in my favor, right? So, and that had nothing to do with me. But then also, I think because of that, when I came to the faith on my own, I came because I actually, I'm challenging even this notion, but there was a decent part of it that was my decision. It wasn't forced on me. Like church attendance itself wasn't forced on me. I think faith was forced on me another way, but not you got to go and you got to believe, you got to read the Bible type of thing. That wasn't forced. And so because some of it was my decision, it also made it easier for me to put it down. Because I also had the ability to learn about the world and life outside of church.
Uh-huh.
Which I think in some ways I'm still limited. I think that what a lot of, particularly folks, like there, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, it's people who were in church who did all the right stuff, but they still was out there living a life being quote unquote in the world. But when I became a person of faith, I really tried to do it. And so there were a lot of things that I missed, like a lot of foreign experiences that people may have had that I did not have. Not that I couldn't have had them, but I gave them up by choice. And so when it came to walking away, that also became a choice. And so I think because of that, the whole world was not wrapped up in church for me. Like a whole lot of it was, but like I did martial arts, I played tennis, I read comic books. Like I did things and understood that there were people that there was a world outside of the four walls. Even though I may have interacted with that world poorly, with really bad frames and judgment and whatnot, because of my understanding, it was easier for me. Well, I won't say maybe easier is the wrong word, because it was still very hard for me. I had more resources to navigate leaving church than a lot of other people do, because if you take church Christianity away from them, it's like they don't exist.
Right.
They don't. Sunday morning is what they live for. Who they are is in Christ. Like that's it. And if you take this away, poof, like they literally are dust in the wind. And while it was very hard for me, it wasn't quite like that. So I was able to walk away. But for me, this progression was just being honest. This is about asking myself honest questions and saying, hey, I have this question, sit with it and really see, like being honest with yourself and see where you come to. And this is about, I came to where I am out of honesty. And this is where I am now. Like where I am now is honestly where I am. And I look at it as growth, as to be getting here. Doesn't mean that everybody will and should get to the point where I am, per se, with me not believing. But you can certainly get to a point where you have a healthier faith. I think a lot of stuff, you can still be a believer and get rid of a whole lot of the unhealthy things that we believe about ourselves and the world around us that we get from church, to be frank. Yeah. And so I think just trusting your own process, seeking out information, allowing yourself to be challenged by what you find, what you discover, not just ignoring it, letting what you find push you, you know what I mean, to some other place. I think those are the things that to keep in mind when you're really trying to progress, particularly when it comes to religion.
Okay. I guess I don't know. I feel like I sound basic because I don't have the in-depth experience that you had with religion. I did grow up with it being forced down my throat. And I never really felt like I got the teachings that a lot of people get. Like I had to go to church, I had to pay attention in church, but it was kind of, I don't want to say half-assed, but it was like I go to church, but I don't go to Bible study. I don't go to children's Bible study. I don't do anything that really affirms or breaks down what I'm hearing in these sermons. And at a young age, I'm like, I mean, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. And then as I got older and I understood what he was talking about, but I still didn't have anything tying me to it, because it was just, as you said, it felt like just a Sunday thing. Or when something bad happens, then we got to pray. And maybe if something good happened, thank God. But there was no in-depth, this is how it applies to every aspect of your life, or this is how you should, and how it should be intertwined in your everyday life. And so when I got old enough to be able to do it on my own, and my parents were, was to the point was like, get up for church. And I was like, no, I'm good. Like, I'll go on my own. I'm not getting up early to go with y'all. And that was when I really started to try to do that work for myself. And then that was when I come with the roadblocks of, it doesn't, to put it simply, I was just, for me personally, it was like 2 + 2 = Hachu. And that was where I got stuck. And I said, I didn't feel like there was anything to be gained from trying to force myself to be religious or understand this religion and try to get that feeling that I see other people having. And now at this point, I probably would say I'm agnostic at best, but I wouldn't particularly call myself spiritual. I do believe in some things, but I don't want to get too deep into that. So I guess that's a kind of I wouldn't say a natural progression. It was just kind of like, I feel like I walked in. You know how in school when you walk into the wrong classroom and you're like, ooh, and everybody looks at you and you're like, oh, my bad. That's kind of how I felt about it. So we could sit here and we could talk about this for a long time, and it's a very interesting topic and just your unique perspective, but I don't want to run too long on the time. So based off of everything you said, I'm going to ask one question and then we'll wrap this part of the show up. And that is, in your opinion, what can people do to create a more affirming religious spaces?
A few things. The one really big thing that I think people need to really embrace is that in order for these spaces to change, that they're going to have to be forced. And I'm saying this from my experience doing advocacy and organizing around LGBTQ inclusion.
Uh-huh.
And doing research on it too, did doctoral research on it. And so it's something that I know pretty well. Particularly we're talking about, historically black churches. So talking about like your AMEs, your Kojics, and what have you. It's not like people don't know many of the things that I'm saying, right? It's not as if these people aren't aware. It's not as if many, like say on a Baptist church or an AME or whatever, they had to get the same degrees that I get. So it's not that these people aren't incapable of, one, the idea that you need to be this brilliant person to get treating people like human beings is really silly to me. But then two, if you want to go that route, most of these preachers have that advanced education and they still do it. And so at some point, people are going to have to say enough is enough. And I know you may like that church. I know the music knocks. They have a good word every now and again, but if this place does not affirm you, at some point people need to leave, either leave or raise a stink. And I know that's tough because Black church, and I say this in other places too. I think Black church has a unique thing because it's one of the few things that is uniquely ours as African Americans. Mm-hmm. Between like that and like Black group organizations. Like, it's ours, and it's so much more than, yes, the theology and believing in God, but it's where we gather, it's where we have fun, is where you learn, like, public speaking is where someone got you a job there. It's so much because of how Blackness and how Black people have to navigate, Yeah,
it's a community.
Yeah, and it's not that it isn't that way for white people, but they have way more options
Yeah.
than black people do, and so it means that much more. But we got to leave. The same way we won't go to Waffle House or won't go to Starbucks. It's to say, hey, listen, Reverend Joe Blow was talking about trans folk real wild, and we had to talk with him, and he said he didn't care, so we're going to leave. Or we're going to write I'm going to write a letter, to the denomination. I'm going to do something. And I think just the fact that we're not going to nice people into inclusion.
Right.
And I think just my experience with a lot of bigger name preachers who have sounded like they were being inclusive, but when you look more closely, really are not. At some point, you got to pull their card, just like we're willing to pull the cards of other people. I know that might be tough for us because we have trouble talking with our own folks when they do something wrong. And I'm not saying to throw them out or to, throw them away or whatnot. But the fact is, they're going to be fine. Like, the preacher who says these hoes ain't loyal over the pulpit, it just made it okay for men to talk about women that way. And that has repercussions. We know that it does. When the female preacher talks about the lesbians are nasty, we know that has repercussions. And so they should be held accountable for those repercussions, because we don't get those lives back that are ruined from what you said. We don't get them back. And so I'm not saying they need to be throwing rocks at their house or whatever, but people need to be held accountable when they do hurtful things. And I think that's the step that, until more people take that step, it's not going to change. With that said, if you really still want to be involved in church, look for blatantly affirming churches that, where you see people say that we blatantly affirm LGBTQ people. Look for those. There's, particularly in urban areas, but even outside of that, look around. You'll probably find one near you. If not, maybe one has a podcast that you like. There's a lot of resources online that you can find on Tumblr, on Twitter, that are progressive and religious, that would help you learn about some things. So maybe you can't go to a progressive church, but you might be able to find, Bishop Yvette Flunder, who has City of Refuge in California. They have stuff. There's lots of preachers and teachers and books, even, that if you look online, if that's your thing, that you can read to have some stuff. But I think just the real posture is, I want people to grow to the point where they can say, hey, this is actually harmful and I need to leave. I don't need to engage this. And don't let anyone make you feel that you have to engage harmful anything just because no, you don't have to. If you want to use this language, if you're comfortable with it, God gave you your life for you to steward. And that means you need to take care of it. And taking care of it means you don't allow it to be harmed by people who don't know how to treat it, which means you can leave.
Yeah.
They won't die. They might be mad, but they'll get over it. It's fine. You have to be okay with making people annoyed. If they really care about you, they'll get over it and figure it out. If not, then it's better that you know. But if it were me, and I'd have one final punch on it, is to say, at some point, y'all have to call people out and say, no, hey, I have a gay son, I have a trans friend, I love you, Pastor, but you foul for that, and if you don't change, we're gonna leave, or I'm gonna file a complaint, or I'm gonna do something, or I'm gonna organize, or just, if you can't do all that, just leave.
Yeah.
Because I think at some point we can't keep supporting them and hoping. People don't come around that way. You have to actually get them a reason to change.
So I can wrap all of that up by saying, put your foot on their necks. That's how change happens. Like you said, we can't, and it really applies in all aspects of life. Well, you can look online, look on Twitter, and see the things that are happening, and change doesn't happen just because we're nice. So it's the same thing with religion, with your churches. If there are things going on that you don't like and you don't want to leave, because I know a lot of people get invested in their church and they feel like it's a staple in their life, so they don't want to just pack up and leave. But don't be afraid to put your foot on somebody's neck.
I like that. I mean, I'm just being real. I mean, that's kind of what, and I mean, I've been definitely called the angry queer more times than not, more times than I like to admit. But
hey, Solange said it best. I got a right to be mad. My
Yeah.
and you calling it out is not gonna keep my foot off your neck.
Hmm.
So that's gonna wrap up this conversation, and I want to thank you for really being so open and honest and free with your journey and everything. But now we are going to switch gears entirely, and let's get into the queer query. Question. So let's go through these questions real quick, and we can get out of here. And this is going to be a geek edition, just because I'm very, very curious. Like, I know we are not as familiar with each other, so when someone says, "Oh yeah, I like geeky stuff," I'm like, okay. I'm like a passive geek. I'm like a geek on the fringe. So I like when I get to ask someone questions that is a little bit more into it than I, or maybe a lot more into it. So first question, who is your favorite superhero?
Superman, hands down.
Oh.
There's no question. Like, Superman is number one, and their distant number two is Batman. But I like Batman a lot. I just like Superman that much more.
Oh, okay. Wow. So I'm like the opposite. Not the opposite, but it took me a long time to come around to Superman. Like, aside from the Lois and Clark show, because I was like young and gay, and I was like, okay, Dean Cain, I see you. I was like, Superman, I was like, you a cheater. Like, how come you can have all the powers? Like, girl, get out of my face. But anyway, my favorite it actually varies. I don't know if I really have a favorite. Currently, my favorite superheroes are Thor, just because I'm like on a Thor high still from Infinity War, and Deadpool. Although I don't know if Deadpool is like an anti-hero.
Yeah, I think he'd be like an anti-hero in a
Okay.
way.
I mean, I like a wisecracker, so give me Deadpool, maybe give me Spider-Man. I don't know about the current Spider-Man. I'm like, I like what they're doing in the MCU with Spider-Man, but I'm like, I have to reconcile with being at the beginning of the journey, because I'm like, I feel like we're so far into it. So to see him still learning how to be a superhero, I'm like, but I'm here for it. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And that is, what was your favorite cartoon growing up?
Oh God, that's so hard. So my cartoon heyday was like, the late 80s to the mid 90s.
Yes.
So my parents are the ones who really watched cartoons. And so I got them from them. So I grew up on like Thundercats.
Yes.
And Silverhawks and Gummy Bears and
Gummy Bears.
What else? Oh, okay. So this is one of my favorite cartoons was David the Gnome. I don't know if anyone remembers that.
I remember that. I used to David the Gnome. I remember that.
But it was such a deep cartoon though. I was so like enthralled. Like, how like they lived for like 400 years, and when they went in the forest, how they died was that they turned into like a tree or something.
Right.
And like these storylines were real deep, but I was really engaged in that type of stuff. I really loved it. But but yeah, like stuff like that. And then as time moved on, like Rescue Rangers and Darkwing Duck and all that stuff. Batman, the animated series, something I still watch today. Like it came on.
Yeah.
I still love cartoons, and of course, like Dragon Ball Z when that came on, when no one really knew what it was.
Right.
Like that's when I would watch it, and so it was really cool. And I watched it when they stopped at a certain point in the story, but they didn't go any further, and so they kept they had like 52 episodes.
Yes, and then they would start over. So you come home from school one day like, okay, I'm ready to see what's next, and then they went all the way back to the first episode, and you're like, wait a minute. They
stopped right when Goku lands on Namek, and he confronts the Ginyu Force, but they didn't go any further than that for like years until they picked up popularity, and then they dubbed it and whatever. And so we were just stuck, but I watched that. I loved it. So yeah, cartoons were a big part growing up, but out of all those, I say probably gotta say Dragon Ball Z, Batman, Thundercats, the Superman cartoon that came on. Justice League was really good. Yeah. All of that. So
okay, my favorite cartoons, I kind of split it the same way in the 80s when I was a little boy, because I think you and I are probably around the same age. So in the 80s, late 80s, it was G.I. Joe, it was
Hmm.
Transformers, and it was Thundercats. Like, you couldn't
Right.
tell me shit about none of those. In the 90s, my all-time favorite cartoon was X-Men the animated series. Like,
That was good. That had its good
I
moments.
did not miss X-Men for nothing. I don't care what's going on. I don't care what chores need to be due. I will work around it so that I can watch some X-Men.
Except they did Jean Grey dirty during that whole series.
Yeah, Jean, yeah, she gets a raw deal a lot of the times, especially for her to be as powerful as she is.
Even without the Phoenix, Jean Grey is a
Yeah,
beast.
even without the Phoenix, I wasn't even thinking about the Phoenix actually. I'm like, she just whatever highest level, because I know there's different, omegas and level fives, however they, whatever iteration. I'm like, she's like at the top of every list. So why y'all do her like this? To the point now where it's like you can make a joke about. I don't know if you've seen it on like Twitter when they're like, whenever someone asks Gene to do something and is
She faints.
yeah.
I've seen it. It's true. It's true though.
I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, last question. We're gonna get out of here. In games with multiple characters to choose from, which character would you normally choose? And so I mean like games where they would have like a muscle guy, they would have a woman, they might have like a skinny nerdy guy or a regular size slim muscular. Which character were you choosing?
Are we talking like a fighting game or something like that?
Any game with with different characters to choose from. Could be a fighting game, it could be an RPG.
Okay. If it's like an RPG, I'm probably gonna go with like the basic guy, probably whoever probably is the star of the show, whether they're male or female. That's probably what I'm going to pick. If
Okay.
it's a fighting game, I usually always pick like the martial arts people, and so like in Street Fighter, I'm picking like Ryu and Ken, all of them. And Mortal Kombat, all the Shaolin people. Oh, I play Mortal Kombat X now, and I still always pick like all the Shaolin people. Kung Lao, Liu Kang, all those folks. Kung Jin, like the gay cousin
Yeah.
of Liu Kang, whatever. I'll pick all the Shaolin people. Is what I'll always pick.
So, before I give my answer, it's funny that you say that because I'm looking like I have an old Xbox, and the reason why I got it is because there's this game called Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks
Oh,
that
I
I
love that
that
game.
I
That game's cool.
loved, and I was like, I have to have it. I have to have it. So it's funny that you mentioned that. For me, when I was younger, I think I would probably go for the normal size muscular guy or the woman if it was like an adventure game. But as I got older and I started understanding like statistics and everything, I was like, well, who's the well-rounded person? It's usually never the big person because they're slow, like they're powerful but slow.
Hmm.
But then you kind of have to balance it because the woman is usually fast, but she's not as hardy, I guess is a good
Hmm.
word. For fighting games, oh man. So, two things I want to mention. Number one, I remember getting into a fight with a childhood friend of mine about how to say Ryu's name. Like, we got into like a full out, not a fist fight, but just a very heated argument because he argued me down that it was Ryu. And I'm like, it's Ryu, it's Ryu. To this day, I don't know which one. I think it depends on who you ask.
I think it's Ryu. Ryu.
Yeah, but he was like, no, it's Rue. And I was like, what? But he was adamant about it. Um, and then fighting, I don't know. I don't know who I would pick. I guess because the other thing was growing up playing video games, I kind of bowed out a lot from fighting games because shit got real. Like, you think about black people and how shit gets real when they start playing spades or dominoes. That's how it was for like me and my brother and my cousins playing fighting games. Like my brother and I, even though he's way younger than me, we had to come to a point where we had to make a pact that we weren't going to play games where we had to play against each other. Like if it was a fighting game where we had to fight each other, we just wouldn't play because it would get that real. Controllers getting thrown and harmful things being said, and it was just very unhealthy. So shout out to us for being young and knowing, knowing our limits and being like, okay, you're my brother and I love you. So, and I don't want to have to beat your ass because you beat my ass in this fighting game. So,
oh, we didn't have that in the Wright household.
We were very competitive.
We were competitive too, but my parents actually played video games, and so that's how I got into it. And so they had Atari and Nintendo.
Listen, shout out to your parents because they seem lit.
And so I would play with them, and they would never let me win. They said I have to earn it on my own, and so eventually I did. And my dad is the one who played Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, and he taught me how to play. And so again, he never let me win until eventually I got better, and then he stopped playing. And so I guess part of it is because I was never like, professional at it, but I generally was the better, if not the best at the game at the people who I knew. Like I would go to like the convent, like to the arcades at the Six Flags or whatever, and like play older people and like win money. So okay. I never really like I was. Again, I'm not that I would go and beat people now, but like for the time and the people who I was around, I was usually pretty good, so I didn't really have to worry about we're winning usually that would be me. But then I liked the competition of it and the fighting part of it, and so I got really good at both of them. And that was when arcades were a big deal, so it took a lot of effort to get good at those games. You had to like go and wait and put your quarter on the machine to get your turn and stuff.
Yes. Yeah. That's very interesting. So listen, your parents, are they looking to adopt?
I think they're past that now.
I am available. I'm just saying.
I think the window for that is closed.
I mean, closed mouths don't get fed, okay? Anyway, that is going to wrap up this episode of Gayside Stories, you guys. Again, Verdell, thank you so much for being on the show, and let people know where they can find you.
Well, I should have a website by now, but I don't, so...
Well...
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at v.w, and the letter V, it's VDOTW. You can find me on Twitter. You can look up my name and see the stuff that I've written. One day I have a website when I stop procrastinating, but until then, that's where you can find me.
Okay. You guys know where to find me. Go to GaysideStories.com for more information, links, everything that you need for the show is at that address. If you want to get in touch with me, if you're interested in being on the show, if you want to collaborate, if you want me on your show, you can email me at GaysideStories@gmail.com. Twitter, Instagram, Gayside Stories, Facebook.com/Gayside Stories. The show is in all kinds of different places, but if you happen to listen on Apple Podcasts and you like what you hear, please take a few minutes to go and write a 5-star review. If you want to just leave a rating, that's great too, but I do appreciate the people that actually write a review. Make sure you're sharing the show with other people. Word of mouth is still probably one of the best ways that podcasts grow. Sharing it on your social media is good too. It's pretty much the same thing. But sometimes just telling someone, hey, listen to this podcast, it works too. Thank you again for listening. And as always, you guys, make sure that you are protecting all of your walls. I don't just mean the ones that are between your butt cheeks. And with that, we are out of here.